Back in the day, before the current era of modern graphics, there was a time where in order to best display the imaginative world the developers had created, they often put in these introduction movies of sorts that would play either right before the title screen or right after you loaded your save file.
You framed a
Rick! Morty!
poster? How hard did the people at the frame store laugh when you brought this in?
They did not laugh at me.
These openings were like gateways into the mind of the creators to show us a taste of their true artistic vision. Some of my favorite memories with gaming growing up involve watching these openings before a long play session and getting absolutely hyped for what's to come. With as much as I loved these as a kid, I thought it would be fun to revisit some of these gems and break down their general structure along with what made them so special and memorable in the first place. So with all that said, let's now take a closer look at these lost but not forgotten relics of the past.
The past returns!
These opening movies most often began in one of three ways. Some of them started with these vague, mystical texts about concepts such as destiny or fate or love or adventure, stuff like that. Some of them began flipping through a book, like each turning of the page was a metaphor for the next chapter or part of the journey. Hell, some games combine both the abstract text and book flipping. However, I would say most commonly, the most popular way to start out these openings would be to have some cheery-eyed protagonists staring triumphantly off into the distance somewhere. Now, a lot of openings had this part in there somewhere, whether they started off with it or not, but still, a lot of them did start off with it. After the opening part of the opening, there was often some cycling through the characters to show the various party members you would get throughout the game. Follow this up with some action sequences thrown into the mix, usually at the climax of the song. Some people staring into the wind again, maybe toss in a casual spoiler that doesn't really make sense in the context of what you know yet, but will later on.
Spoiled our surprise!
And then finally end it with the two protagonists staring off somewhere, which seems to be a very common thing in these intros. And that's pretty much your stereotypical JRPG opening movie. They didn't always follow that exact formula. Sometimes they only contain some of those parts and not all. But generally speaking, it's a pretty good representation of what the average one looked like. While opening movies in JRPGs still exist to this day on some level, they're vastly different, and I think there's no denying the fact that the king of these intros, the GOAT, was definitely the PS1 era, and mainly just the PlayStation itself. Let me explain why. It's pretty simple, really. The Super Nintendo era didn't have the same graphical capability as a PlayStation to pull off the same type of movies. Even in the PlayStation era, its rival console, the Nintendo 64, didn't have the same technical power to do what it could. Which actually really sucks, because I feel like Ogre Battle 64 could have had a pretty kick-ass opening. But instead, all we got was this basic, boring, text-scrolling bullshit with none of the cool visuals to go with it. Anyway, not to go off on a tangent there. PS2 era did have some pretty cool openings as well. Not quite as many as the PS1 though, and graphics were also getting better at this point, so the difference between the opening movies and gameplay graphics were getting less extreme, so in a way it kind of lessened the impact and the coolness factor that these openings had. As you can imagine, the impact has only been further lessened with each passing console generation as graphics have gotten better and better and better. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, opening movies in JRPGs still do exist to this day to some extent. They're just more akin to typical anime openings from TV shows rather than the cinematic movies we often got in the past. On that note, that makes a nice little segue to this next part I want to talk about, which is discussing the different graphical styles used in these intros: CGI and anime. First, let's start with CGI. From a technical standpoint, the CGI intros were perhaps a bit more impressive at the time, mainly for the fact that none of us had ever really seen anything like it. Even though they're only one console generation apart, compare the intros from Final Fantasy VI to Final Fantasy VIII. Pretty fucking crazy to say the least. While anime was pretty niche in the West at the time still, this was new territory altogether. And being in new territory, of course both examples of good and bad iterations would come of it. Needless to say, to put it lightly, not all of these CGI openings were created equal or had the same level of high quality. And maybe not always, but I would say more often than not, the quality of the CGI also correlated with the quality of the game in some way. It wasn't too surprising that games with poor CGI animation, such as Guardians Crusade or Beyond the Beyond for example, were also pretty average to below average games as well. Meanwhile, games such as Chrono Cross or Final Fantasy VIII with their gorgeous CGI, despite how divisive the gameplay elements might be, it was very obvious that the production quality and the amount of effort they put in throughout the game was very high. Some of the best CGI intros from that time still hold up surprisingly well to this day. I mean, maybe not as well as they did in the past, but I think they're still pretty to look at. On the other end of the spectrum, we had anime-based intros, and like its CGI counterpart, not all these were made with the same level of polish. Let's take Vanguard Bandits for example. Despite actually being a hidden gem for the PlayStation, its animation in the opening movie definitely doesn't reflect that and is pretty laughable to say the least. Honestly, I'd say this probably has the worst animation in any anime opening I've seen on the PlayStation. Still a pretty good game though. Little quick tangent here, but I couldn't help but notice the striking resemblance one of the mechs in this opening had to a particular anime. Those that have seen the show will instantly know what I'm referring to, but if you haven't seen it, it's from Gurren Lagann. Regardless if you've seen it though, I feel like it's quite obvious to tell the visual similarities between the two. I had never noticed this until I started doing research for this video, so I just thought it was pretty interesting that this show drew inspiration from such a random part of a random niche game in a niche genre. Anyway, just thought that was a neat little factoid for fans of the show. Moving on. Shitty animation aside, let's talk about the ones with the good animation now. Examples that instantly come to mind are openings from games such as the Wild Arms series, the Tales of series, Breath of Fire 4, Chrono Trigger, Suikoden 3. All of these openings have awesome animation that really suck you into the world and do a great job with their immersion factor. Great animation could really bring the characters to life and portray their traits and mannerisms that the actual game couldn't necessarily show that well itself. The more accurately they could show the unique setting and world of the game, the more hyped you would be for the game. And I had to point this out. If it was an anime-based intro, you could bet your ass at some point it would have some character either standing in the rain, or standing at night, or standing in the rain at night, gazing off in the distance with an intense look of emotion or melancholy. Literally, this trope was in like 90% of them. No joke.
Big whoop, wanna fight about it?
Alright, enough about the visuals though. Let's talk about the music now. When it came to the music used in these openings, they often went one of two routes. It would either be some type of motivational instrumental based on the theme of the game, or a catchy J-pop song. Sometimes the instrumentals were by design choice, but oftentimes, back in the PS1, PS2 era, there was originally Japanese vocals in the version released in Japan. But for some reason, they didn't think the West would like that, so they gave us these instrumentals instead. Now, some of these Western versions I do actually like more. Wild Arms 2 comes to mind. For the most part though, I would say it was kind of a shame when we didn't get the original Japanese opening. I just think they usually sounded a little bit better and fit the anime theme of the intro more. Plus, I just like going with the creator's original vision, because I feel like they initially picked that song for a reason, you know? Tales of Symphonia is an example where I think the original Japanese version with the vocals sounded much better than the generic instrumental we got in the US version released on the GameCube. Considering the Tales games are pretty much playable anime in game form, it only makes sense that the J-pop route would fit the aesthetic of their opening more, much like an actual anime. With that said though, when they did do an instrumental by design choice, it was usually pretty fucking fire. I mean shit, some of the very best openings from that time period didn't use any vocals, but they could still elicit a strong emotional reaction out of the player. The ability to make a player feel a certain way through music alone speaks volumes about the talent of the composer. And when it comes to skilled composers evoking emotion out of the player, in my opinion, none did it greater than Yasunori Mitsuda. His work on the Chrono series is absolutely timeless, so of course the music used in those openings would be fucking phenomenal. Despite how amazing the entire Chrono Cross soundtrack is, the very best song on that whole piece might just be the song from the opening, Time Scar. if someone ever tried to argue with me that music in video games can't be a legit form of art, I'd probably play this song and tell them to go fuck themselves. For real though, this piece is just so beautiful on all accounts, with the multi-layers of various instruments used and timely effective changes in tempo. Like, if someone just heard this for the first time and didn't know what it was from, I can pretty much guarantee their first thought would not be a video game. On that note, with as amazing as Mitsuda's music is in both the Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross opening, I do think it's a shame we didn't get a traditional opening for Xenogears, which he also composed the music for. I mean, we did get a cinematic plot-based intro, but the animation just wasn't that good, and I was kind of wanting something more in the vein of Chrono Cross, Chrono Trigger, Wild Arms, you know, that type of opening. Just a missed opportunity really, but it's all good. Still one of my favorite games ever. Speaking of favorites, I want to sort of end this video by taking this time to talk about some of my various favorite openings throughout the years. With as much as I just gushed over them, you can probably guess some of my favorite openings ever are both Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger. I know I've talked about them a lot already, but there is one little last thing I want to mention about them. So, I really like how they both start slower paced before moving into something more epic, but I notice a slight difference in how they go about that. Chrono Trigger's opening begins looking at a photograph of all the various party members you get throughout the game, and when combined with the music playing at the same time, it instills a sense of nostalgia within the player. Meanwhile, the opening to Chrono Cross begins with reading pages out of a book, and those words are also meant to make the player feel some sense of nostalgia. So in other words, Chrono Trigger shows what it wants you to feel, and Chrono Cross tells what it wants you to feel. I think this is very reminiscent on the philosophy of both games and how they go about things. In comparison to Cross, Trigger is way less dialogue heavy, and instead relies on expressive sprite animation and scenic music to drive home emotional moments. Don't get me wrong, Chrono Cross does this too, but it's also infamous for the expository text dumps near the end of the game to relay tons of vital plot information. The last third of Chrono Cross is very much telling, not showing, whereas Chrono Trigger is pretty much the opposite throughout the game. Now, I might be looking a little too much into this part of the opening, so this comparison might be a bit of a stretch. But it was an excuse for me to talk about one of my favorite series for a little bit longer, so anyway, moving on. The Wild Arms series easily has some of my favorite openings in any games ever. Mainly talking about the first three though. The fourth one was pretty much a great value, market pantry Wild Arms opening with unmemorable music and below average animation. And the fifth one just used in-game graphics with another not that catchy J-pop song. So yeah, the first three are where it's at though.
Get the fuck out.
The first one is just iconic because it begins with that incredibly catchy whistling tune. The soothing and hopeful melody of the whistling, combined with the vibrant moon contrasting with the darkness of the night, created a really ambient and serene atmosphere. Despite how awesome the intro to the first game was, the intro to the second game is probably my favorite in the whole series. The first disc one, not the second disc. The opening to the second disc is still really good too, I just like the first one a little bit more overall. The first disc just has some really artistic shots, like Lord Blazer standing on the rocks, Lilka laying across the star, or standing on the mountain trail with her umbrella, Brad in the underground weapon silo, him walking with that big-ass fucking missile on his back. Speaking of that shot, anyone else get mad Wolfwood vibes from Trigun there? You know, just how he holds it across his back kinda reminds me of how Wolfwood holds his cross across his back. Considering the developers of Wild Arms are Trigun fans and already put a poster of Vasta Stampede in the game as an Easter egg, I think there's no coincidence here. Anyway, the second disc intro does have some cool animation that I want to mention. Like Brad blasting all these fools and Cannon going into beast mode on this literal beast. They're just pretty cool openings all in all. And finally, the intro to the third one in the series is also pretty damn cool, I think. I really like how a certain part of the intro changes based on where you're at in the game to make it plot relevant. I don't really remember any other intro that's done this off the top of my head, so I always thought this was a nice little touch. Anyway, that's probably enough about the Wild Arms series. Let's move on to one of my other favorite openings now, the Breath of Fire 4 opening. The intro to Breath of Fire 4 had a really Japanese and Oriental vibe with the music and the art style, which I really dug. I think it did a fantastic job at showing you the setting of the game, which really immersed you into the world before each play session. Plus it had those cool bits of actual Japanese thrown in there. Now, did 10-year-old me understand what the fuck they were saying? No, but it still sounded cool as shit. Combine that with some action thrown in there as well. It was just a really cool opening overall. Okay, let's move on to my favorite intro from the PS2 era. I know some common favorites from that generation are the openings from Tales of the Abyss, Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, Persona 3 and 4, but I gotta say my favorite hands down is the opening from Suikoden 3. I just really love the mood that the mystical chanting combined with the epic instrumental creates. I think the coolest part of the intro is when the chorus kicks in for the second time while Ghetto's crew is kicking ass in the background. I swear that part always gets me hyped every time I see it. Really, the only bad thing I can say about it is that it just makes me kinda sad that we didn't get openings for the first two games as well. I mean, imagine an intro for Suikoden 1 and 2 done in a similar way to Wild Arms 1 and 2. That could have been pretty fucking awesome. But oh well, what we got is still good, so just gotta be happy with that. Okay, let's move on to the last openings I want to talk about, which is the Tales of series. It would take far too long to talk about them each individually, so I'm just gonna reflect on them as a whole. And actually, despite how much I love the series, I kinda just want to poke fun at all the cliche stuff they do in most of their openings. They usually start with the main hero looking off in the distance somewhere. After that, it's not uncommon to see the main heroine frolicking in a field of flowers or bright colors. Next, they'll likely introduce the cast of characters, one by one. At this point, the structure can vary a bit, but some common scenes to include would be dueling against one of the antagonists or rival of the main character. A lot of times they do both actually, or various forms of it throughout the opening. Like I mentioned earlier when talking about anime openings, there's usually someone or multiple people standing in the rain or standing at night with this somber look in their eyes. I mean shit, the opening to Tales of Zestiria seriously does this with your entire party for like 30 seconds. At some point near the end of the song, it usually slows down in pace for a period of time to create build-up for the final climax. And then finally, probably the most common way to end their openings was to have the main hero and heroine once again staring off somewhere. And that's basically the opening to a Tales game in a nutshell. On that note, that basically concludes everything that I want to say as well. I ended up rambling on a lot longer than I initially planned on, but I hope some of you found some enjoyment in reminiscing on this nostalgic time and reliving some past memories. Other than that, my brother and I wanted to wrap up this video with one final segment.
Everyone, thank you so much for watching our video. It really means a lot to us if you took the time to do so. If you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to our channel below, or you can donate to our Patreon to even further support the channel.
We're really trying to grow this and turn it into a full-time thing to put out more timely videos, so any donation, no matter how small, is greatly appreciated. It's by no means necessary though, as we're happy just to have your view. So thanks again everyone. This is Gaming Productions. Until next time.